Good evening. My name's Dr. Jeremy Pilcher. I'm the Program Director for the LLM Qualifying Law Degree, or QLD. I'd like to welcome you here this evening to a short presentation that I'm going to do on the LLM Qualifying Law Degree. So I'll get the presentation slides up to start shortly, but just a couple of quick words to say thanks for joining us this evening, and if you've got questions, please just type them in, and as we go along. So I'd prefer it if you raise the question straight away rather than just wait and then forget it. But after we've done I've done my presentation on the slides, there'll be an opportunity at the end of that to ask any other questions that you may have at that point. So basically, this is going to be a pretty broad overview of the qualifying law degree at a master's level, and I guess one of the important things to say about the master's degree is that it's basically one of the academic routes where you can complete the academic stage of training that is required in order to become a barrister or a solicitor. So the reason that is important is because the LLM QLD, in a sense, I guess it's quite an intensive period of time, covers the core subject areas, or what the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, or the SRA, call the 7 foundations of legal knowledge. So there's I think at this point, it's probably worthwhile for me just to cover quickly the nature of the Birkbeck LLM QLD. And you can see from the slide there that I've just given an overview of the approach that we take here at Birkbeck to the LLM QLD. The point about it is that we take what I would call a pretty holistic approach to the way in which we teach the degree. So we situate it, as you can see there, in an historical, social, and comparative context. And as basically what that means is we don't just teach you the law, we also teach you the context that gives rise to the law and the social environment in which the law is implemented and regulates people. So moving along to the qualifying law degree, and as I've already just said, the qualifying law degree provides you with the 7 foundations of legal knowledge. I think it's worth saying just right at the very outset that you may well already have heard that the pathways for professional qualification as a barrister and solicitor are in the process of transition. Now, the thing that I would stress here is, rather than read the entire contents of the slide that I've got up on the screen at the moment, what I think the key thing that you need to take out of that is the changes are going to affect the vocational aspect of the qualification of becoming a barrister or a solicitor. Fundamentally, in terms of the substantive legal knowledge that you require, in other words, the foundational subjects, those haven't changed. And the purpose of the qualifying law degree is to provide you with that solid basic foundation of the degree. And just in case you have an interest in looking at the detail around the solicitor's situation, so as distinct from the barristers, so barristers are the people that tend to appear more exclusively in court, whereas solicitors do work for firms of solicitors. I've given you a slide here that you can have a look at again a bit later about the SRA, which has the duty to ensure that the people who work as solicitors are properly qualified. So this is really just to say that the qualifying law degree remains legally relevant and in fact is pretty much an essential part of remains an essential part of becoming a barrister or a solicitor. So looking now a little bit more detail at the program structure, in broad terms, what as is set out there is that you must obtain a total number of credits. We're currently in the process of evening out the number of credits which are done in each year of study. But essentially what you're looking at is the possibility of doing your master's, your LLM QLD, in either a full-time mode over 2 years or a part-time mode over a little bit longer period of time. And that's what the next slide relates to. It just gives you an idea of what the full-time mode, what kind of study load you would be looking at over a full-time period. So you would be looking, as you can see there, in terms of year 1, at the core subjects of the legal systems and methods, the constitutional administrative law, which, just to give you an idea, the kind of thing that when they had the argument in court about whether or not Parliament should be prorogued, that's the kind of thing that would be studied under constitutional administrative law. And then you've got law of obligations, which is contracts, and also law of obligations tort, which is looking at when somebody hits you by negligently if you're riding a bicycle down the road. So, and just for interest's sake, I teach at the law school in the subject of law of obligations in tort. So that's what a full-time mode of study looks like. And you'll notice, I think the most important thing to emphasize in that is that there are no optional modules. You do have the ability to research a particular area of interest through the research project, which you can see comes in year 2. But in order to be able to cover all of the core legal subject and content, you need to be, you can't unfortunately fit in any optional modules. So just to give you an idea of what the part-time module mode looks like, there you can see that it takes place over a 3-year period, and you can see that you're studying slightly less load in any given particular year, but fundamentally it's the same content, just spread out over a little bit longer period of time. So in terms of part-time mode, I think it's something which is often not taken into account as an option seriously enough sometimes. I would very much urge you to consider the possibility of the part-time mode if you are a little bit unsure about your ability in terms of time commitment. And when I talk about time commitment, I think one of the things that you obviously need to think about is the time that's available to you to study. So we do all of our courses, as you're probably already aware, in the evenings between 6 and 9 presently. But the other thing that you need to factor in when you're looking at the need for study commitment is what pinch points are you going to be looking at throughout the year when you need to have time available, for example, to complete essays, or particularly in order to complete exams, because we still do assess a lot of subjects on the LLM QLD by exams. So one of the things that you must look at is what sort of time you're going to have in the lead up to exams, which usually take place around about the May-June period. Okay, so moving along from part-time mode, just to flag up that you should be looking at all your options in terms of any financial support that may be available, and there is a student advice service at Birkbeck which I would urge you to get in touch with and discuss the options if you are looking seriously at coming along to Birkbeck to study in the next academic year. So, as I've already mentioned, there are certain key considerations that you need to give some thought to if you're planning on taking up the LLM QLD, which obviously, because it's taught at Birkbeck in the evenings, is something that you can do, and while you have other commitments during the daytime. I think the key thing here to draw to your attention out of this slide is the issue of how intensively you want to study, and particularly if you happen to be coming back to study after a longish break, as many of our students are. We find a lot of our most successful and indeed motivated students may have been out of academic study for a period of time, maybe many years. If you have reservations about whether or not you're willing to go back to fully intensive academic study, part-time study may be the option for you. And I've given here some suggestions that for further contact with Birkbeck that may help you provide you with further information in making that decision in relation to perhaps coming along to an open evening, or as you can see there, if you're looking at undergraduate study, the Get Started workshops. So what sort of time commitment are we talking about in terms of deciding how intensive you're willing to have your study being? And this is obviously going to be an extremely personal decision. We have a wide variety of students from very different backgrounds participating in Birkbeck programs and including the LLM QLD. But as a general rule of thumb, what we generally say is 25 to 30 hours of organised study per week. Although, as I say, it's going to depend largely on you and your ability. So if you have a demanding career or other commitments, then you really are going to need to factor those in, because law is one of those subjects. It's a little bit like maths, I guess, in this way. You really need to make sure that you start and come along consistently, because courses build over a period of time, and if you're starting to drop in and out of lectures, or you're uncertain about being able to come along on a regular basis to seminars, that's something that you're going to have to, that you should factor in and consider very carefully, and will definitely impact on your decision about whether or not you would be looking at a part-time or a full-time period of study. As I mentioned, one of the issues that you definitely need to take into account is look at the spread of the commitment over a period of time. And as I say there, the examination period for law is normally between mid-May and mid-June. And please also bear in mind the possibility, if things don't necessarily go as well for whatever reason, and that may be, quite unexpected events which do come up, you may then be looking at a reassessment period in August or September. And so that is something to factor in if you have other family obligations or work obligations, which may be very intensive at that time period. It's important for me to mention that because this is a professionally orientated degree, there is a time limit which is relevant, and this is a criteria established by the Law Society, which, as you can see there, is a maximum. You have a maximum of 6 years to complete a qualifying law degree. So that is relevant to whether or not you are considering the possibility of taking a break in studies. For example, if you do find that unexpectedly you don't feel able to maintain the level of intensity of study, you may wish to take a break in study. If you do, that's not a problem, but you will just have to bear in mind that there is this maximum 6 years to complete. So if you've decided to come along to Birkbeck, we provide a range of support services. And as I mentioned there is the student advice service. And I would definitely urge you, if, for example, you have any sort of disability at all, to get in touch well in advance so that you can get a good understanding of how you can be supported to successfully complete your studies. And in this day and age, and particularly given the nature of the LLM QLD, the reality is that the degree is clearly focused and is the option that students who are looking at going on to become professionally qualified lawyers. They may, many students become professionally qualified, they become a solicitor or even a barrister, but don't necessarily go on and work directly in legal practice. They may go on, for example, and work in-house as legal counsel or in legally related jobs. We also have careers and employability service, and you'll also see there Birkbeck Talent, which is the Birkbeck College's own professional recruitment service. Again, with something like an LLB QLD, whether or not you're looking at it part-time or full-time, it's always an extremely good idea to get engaged with the careers and employability aspects as soon as you arrive and build your profile. So I think apart from that, that's basically all that I wanted to say. I think the key thing that you need to keep in mind is that you've got choices to make around primarily the level of intensity of your study and how you can fit that in with your all-round work-life balance, I guess. So hopefully that's been useful, and I don't think there's any questions that I need to answer at this stage. But if you have any questions at this point, I'm more than happy to answer them. Please type them in into the chat area if you would like, or I think there's also the possibility of, if something comes up at a later date, I'm sure we'd be able to get back to you with information. No. So question from David. Question is, do you need to have studied law previously? As part of my role as the LLM QLD program director, I also am responsible for admissions. So that's going to probably change, but this year I've dealt with all the admissions, and I can say very confidently that we have a very wide range of students on the course, and many of them have studied first degrees that are completely unrelated to law. But we do ask, as part of the admission requirements, that you have at least a 2:2 degree at undergraduate level. So, okay, there's a question from Reshma, which okay, so the GDL is widely popular. This is the question. Okay, sorry, Reshma, I've just seen your first point about question about the GDL versus the LLM. Okay, so the GDL is widely popular. How is the content different from the LLM offered by Birkbeck? So just a little bit of background about my knowledge before I answer this question. I have previously worked at BPP, which is a vocational university offering the GDL and also professional training qualification. I personally have never taught the GDL program, but I will say this: I have taught students who have studied the GDL. For example, they're people who've had training contracts, they have training contracts, they're doing the LPC, and in order to get on the LPC, they did the GDL as distinct from an undergraduate law degree or a master's law degree. I think the single biggest difference for me that the students who have done an undergraduate or postgraduate law degree is they have a much more thorough and complete knowledge of the law. The GDL basically is a very, what I would describe, I don't want to be negative about it, and it's got a lot of benefits depending on what you're trying to do, but the reality is that you're expected to cover a lot of stuff in a very short period of time. And the reality is that law is one of those subjects which just unavoidably involves a lot of reading. And so the way that they do that is they condense down the material a lot on the GDL, and you tend to focus exclusively on absolutely the bare minimum, and you don't tend to get a lot of depth. So if I can use my example, when I come out of a professional background, I worked as a lawyer, and then I became a fraud examiner before I became an academic. And I was teaching a class once at BPP, as it happens. We were doing business finance because business finance was required by the firm that they were employed, that they had trading contracts with. And I just happened to make a passing remark about an aspect of commercial law, which I regard as being basically pretty standard part of legal knowledge, particularly if you happen to be working for a large commercial law firm. There were a number of people in the class who had done the GDL who had never heard of what I was talking about. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who would have done an undergraduate degree or a postgraduate, like an LLM degree, would necessarily have known the answer. Maybe they'd been taught it and forgotten it. But that's the kind of thing that for me makes the difference. I think it's if you've done an LLM, you've got more depth and coverage, and I think that's something which is welcomed by firms wherever you're planning on getting a job. But I also think that it's something which can give you a lot of confidence when you're going into job interviews, but also when you take up your first position. So that's a pretty wide-ranging answer, and hopefully it's covered. If you've got a particular question about that, it may be, in terms of specifics, in terms of content, it may be that you would want to email me and about a particular program, in which case I'd be more than happy to look at that. Okay, so I think as far as I know, there isn't any other questions. So as I say, if you do, often you'll listen to these kind of presentations and think of your question later. And if that's the case, then, as I say, please feel free to get in touch. It's usually pretty straightforward for me to answer questions, and I'm quite involved at the moment in looking at the implications of the new route for the vocational training that's being introduced by the SRA. So I'm reasonably familiar with everything that's going on at the moment. So we've got some, probably there's no particular rush to. Okay, that's great. So it looks like Reshma's got another question coming up. There seems to be a bit of a time lag, I think. So I can see Reshma's typing now. Okay, like University of Law that offer MA law as alternatively. Okay, I would. So you may have to give me some more information, Reshma. So you're saying they offer an MA rather than an LLM? Is what you're looking at? Okay. Right. Yeah. I mean, I would basically make the same point. I would essentially say if they're looking at 1 year rather than 2, I mean, it's possible. I mean, I would have to look at a particular program to see what exactly they were doing. But my instinct would be that they're probably offering something closer to the GDL. And my view is that there is no substitute for time spent. So in other words, if you're doing a 2-year program, if you've got the time to do 2 years, personally, I think it's a good solid grounding that you get and gives you in all areas of the law. If you look at, and the reason I say that is not, I mean, I don't want to I don't want to make it sound like it's just I would say that because, of course, I would say that because I'm at Birkbeck. I think the reason that I'm saying that is because if you look on the SRA website, they make it very clear that that there are these 7 foundations of legal knowledge. And to be honest with you, I personally think that in order to study each area of those key foundational areas, you're gonna get better coverage if you've got 2 years to deal with that. I think that, I mean, fair enough, at Birkbeck we covered the material exclusively in the evenings, in 3 years in the evenings. So in that sense, it's pretty intensive because you can be studying like 3 nights, coming into Birkbeck 3 nights of the week. And I honestly think that that shows benefit later on in your legal education and career, the ability to really grapple with a legal subject in depth. So we're coming up to the half hour, so we'll probably be wrapping this up in a few minutes, unless you've got something else that you'd like me to touch on. As I say, if you've got some of these questions, like I'm answering Reshma's questions, for example, in relation to these longer and shorter programs in a pretty generic sort of way. To be honest with you, you probably really have to look at particular program syllabus. So like you can do that using the slide that I've shown you earlier about looking at the part-time and the full-time program at Birkbeck and compare how those courses are covered by comparison to the way that it's, say for example, how it might be done on a GDL program. Okay, so if there are no other questions, then I think we can probably look at wrapping things up around about now. I don't want to cut anybody off who might be in the middle of typing. So I see David has left. So, distance learning. At the present moment in time, distance learning at Birkbeck is not possible. However, we do have our learning materials on a virtual learning environment called Moodle. Lectures are generally recorded, so that does give some flexibility, but we do recommend that you attend as many seminars and lectures as you possibly can. In terms of distance learning, looking ahead, we are looking at the possibility of introducing some courses with blended learning, but that's not currently something that is available. So with it pretty much time being up, thanks very much for coming and joining this evening. I hope you've given some helpful material, and as I say, please stay in touch if you've got any other questions. So